Welcome to New York's #2 sports show. It has happened. Chris Kreider has been traded by the New York Rangers to the Anaheim Ducks. So he is reunited with some former teammates, uh, Jacob Trouba being the most notable one. So who would have thought that when the memo went out last season regarding Trouba and Kreider, that they would actually both end up on the same team? The deal is Chris Kreider. This is essentially a salary dump. It's Chris Kreider to the Ducks. They do acquire prospect Carey Terrance, who is a center, a second-round pick by the Anaheim Ducks, a late second-round pick in 2023. And the Rangers acquire a third-round pick in this 2025 draft that originally belonged to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Rangers trade Anaheim a fourth-round pick, and it's actually the one that the Rangers received in the Jacob Trouba deal. So Anaheim gets that pick back. So essentially, the Rangers move up 15 spots in the draft, and they acquire Terrance for Chris Kreider. And the big thing here is that the Rangers are able to trade the full salary of the remainder of Kreider's deal. So 2 years left on the deal, $6.5 million per each season, and that is now fully off the books. So similar to Trouba, where now at that point it wasn't 2 years; it was more like at that point 1.5 years, $8 million in both of those. That's the key here: is that the Rangers, open up cap space, which they needed. Actually, the Rangers really aren't in the best cap situation currently. Now, I think that there's more moves to come. There's a lot to discuss here. Mainly about Kreider, but as well, like I think the next domino to fall, it feels like, is Keandre Miller being dealt. Now he's a restricted free agent, so either the Rangers make the call to commit to him, on a long-term basis, which I don't think they feel comfortable doing. Um, that's not the only option. They could go with a shorter term deal, but I don't think, again, it just doesn't feel that way. Based on everything that, we're hearing, it would seem as if by July 1st, so, within the next 3 weeks or so, that Keandre Miller will no longer be a Ranger. But again, like, that's all speculation at this point. What we do know is that Chris Kreider is gone. And it's a sad day. It's one that unfortunately we knew at the end of last season. Like, there was no question about it that Kreider's days were numbered. And it's crazy how things turn so quickly, because just, a little over a year ago, he had maybe his most heroic moment as a Ranger with the natural hat trick in the third period against the Carolina Hurricanes, uh, which led the Rangers to advancing to the Eastern Conference Final. And um, at that time, and it's so easy to get kind of wrapped in and lost in the situation. It felt as if, and I think I must have prefaced it at the time, like if that had somehow led the Rangers to um, winning the Stanley Cup last season, there really would have been a good chance that Chris Kreider would have had his number retired. But you fast forward to now, and this was really a disastrous season last year, no question about it. You know, it's an interesting case, I think. I don't think it's easy on either end to say definitively yes or no. I would lean no as far as him having his number retired based on everything that we have seen, and again, that's me saying this right in the moment, right? Fast forward a few years from now, opinions can change for sure. And that's not what this is about, but I think that is a topic of conversation that we're seeing. And I think, to be fair, if I'm the Rangers, I wouldn't be just handing out the number 20 next season, right? At least give it a year or two, if nothing else. Right? I think, whether you want to call it out of respect or just, in case that day does come that you do decide to do that. Because if you look at the career numbers for Kreider, he is up there. Now, a lot of it is quantity for the amount of time that he's been with the team. But still, I mean, there's no doubt about it. I believe third in goals. His playoff numbers are off the charts as far as playoff goals. I think games played, he might even be like eighth all time for the Rangers. He ended up tied for the most power play goals with Camille Henry, which is like, I mean, he should have been able to surpass that. But again, it just speaks to Kreider's really, really rough play last season. I mean, it's kind of crazy. He ends up with 22 goals in 68 games, which is, really a lot better than you would have thought, but only 8 assists. And just the eye test, it was brutal. It was really, really bad. A major drop off from what we had seen in previous years, where really he took his game to another level. But let's, I guess, go all the way back with Kreider at this point. 2009 draft pick by the Rangers. Um, First round, 19th overall pick, and really one of the most successful Ranger draft picks in their history. And certainly in recent memory, and especially for a forward, Rangers have had a lot of trouble. That's not been a secret as far as with their drafts. But Kreider was able to, be the outlier and really came on the scene during the 2012 playoffs and made an impact. And you don't normally see stuff like that. Like, he scored 5 goals in 18 games and some big goals as well under John Tortorella. And so now Chris Kreider, he was the last remaining link to the John Tortorella era. Currently, Mika Zibanejad is now, and we'll talk about him. Zibanejad is now the longest tenured Ranger. Now obviously, JT Miller was a Ranger before Zibanejad, but JT Miller was gone for years. So in terms of continuous time with the Rangers, it is now Zibanejad, who is now the only player remaining from the Alain Vigneault era. But Kreider, a really great 2012 playoffs, but it took him some time to really find his footing, you know, in the NHL. Like, that next year, 2013, which was a shortened lockout season, he didn't do much. Only played 23 games. Now, again, it was only like a 48 game schedule, if I remember correctly. But really, in terms of regular season, postseason, it's funny. He did actually have a big overtime winning goal against the Bruins to keep the Rangers season alive back in 2013. But really, he didn't do much. That was, he only played 10 minutes a night. It was not a great year for Kreider, but, still 2014 rolls around. Tortorella's gone. Vigneault comes in. And what's kind of forgotten about is that Chris Kreider did not make that team. I remember JT Miller actually made the team over Kreider at that time. But the way it turns out is Kreider's role ends up being a lot more than Miller's that year, where maybe it was exactly what he needed, because he ends up playing, 66 games. It was a much better year than the year before. And also the 66 games, that was really mostly due to injury. But like, again, he was called up pretty quickly. Even though he didn't make the team, he was called up pretty quickly on that season. And he came back just, in the nick of time. I believe it was in the middle of the Pittsburgh Penguins series. And ends up playing 15 games, has 5 goals, 8 assists, and 13 points. He was really a key cog in the Rangers reaching the cup final against the Kings. Had a lot of big goals. He's well known for the collision with Carey Price in game 1 of the Eastern Conference Final, which Montreal fans are still upset about. But, you start to notice that this is someone that can perform in the playoffs. Now, look, I can still recall the sample size is large, so don't get me wrong. There's a lot of memories of him being invisible. Like, I think that's a theme through really the 2010s decade. Major inconsistencies for Chris Kreider, where there was so much ability to do more, and he kind of fell short of that. Like, he put up good numbers, but it felt like he couldn't reach his ceiling. But as far as the playoffs were concerned, just time after time, really, really big goals. I mean, to stick with the playoff theme, 2014 even, he had a massive goal against the Canadiens late in a game they lost. I was at that game. It was game 3 against Montreal, where he scores about 30 seconds left. Like, he had a flair for the dramatic. Going now to 2015, he basically saved the Rangers season with a goal against the Capitals late, with the goal he pulled in game 5 with the Rangers down 3-1. That was massive. Like, and I'm probably going to forget a few of them here, as I'm kind of just thinking about them in my head. But I mean, he had a big goal then in the next game in game 6, a very early goal to kind of set the tone against the Caps. But um, this is someone that look like the 2017 playoffs really didn't do as much. Honestly, he really didn't. In Vigneault's last year, um, you know, 3 goals, 1 assist, 4 points. He did get a lucky, sort of a fortunate assist on a Mika Zibanejad overtime goal against Montreal that I remember. Um, then the Rangers, then the Rangers kind of fall on hard times, and it's interesting that he is able to kind of survive that. He is able to basically, the Rangers trade away a lot of people during this sort of late 2010s time. Unfortunately for him, he develops a blood clot. And the weird thing too is I was also actually at this game where he left the game because of this. And I believe uh I can't remember. I don't know if he missed the entire rest of the season. I don't think he did. He played 58 games. It was the 2017-2018 season, Vigneault's last year, but he missed a good chunk of time. And within this time, players were getting dealt. So in a weird way, he was kind of off the board. But there always was trade rumors around Kreider. There were. And at this point, he's basically consistently averaging around, 40 to 45 points a year, maxing out at 28 goals, which is good. But you're going to find that eventually he takes off. We haven't gotten there yet. But like, and at this point, he's not killing penalties yet either, which becomes a really big staple of his game once we reach the 2020, the next decade. Um, but at the same time, like he remains, and Mika Zibanejad is acquired in that 2016-2017 season, and him and them and Pavel Buchnevich develop a trio. That's a pretty consistent line for about, I don't know, for about 4 or 5 seasons. Um, but you see a lot of the mainstays go. I'm not going to name all of them, but you know, Kreider really is that one. He was that one remaining link, to the true Henrik Lundqvist era. Obviously, there's Zibanejad, but really, Kreider was the last one. Um, but let's fast forward now to David Quinn. And me mentioned David Quinn, and this is the first time that I've spoke about it on the channel, that David Quinn is actually back as assistant coach, which is, definitely a bit of a surprise. He was on Mike Sullivan's staff in Pittsburgh the last couple of, at least maybe it was just this past season, but still, he was on Sullivan's staff. And David Quinn is back, which I mean, we talked about the possibility of John Tortorella, which did not happen. Now, the Tortorella one, I mean, we can argue on which one would have been stranger. We're not going to go there because Quinn's is more recent. He was behind the Ranger bench just 4 years ago. And there will be returning players, Kreider not being one of them. But, there is, of course, Adam Fox and Igor Shesterkin. Um, and, likely Artemi Panarin, although there's a conversation to be had there that who knows what his future is with him only having 1 year left on his deal. There's Mika Zibanejad, which with Kreider now being traded, maybe he would be more amenable to, waiving his no move clause. I think Zibanejad will be back this season, but I think there's definitely possibility that he's gone. I do think that Chris Kreider would be interested in, looking into a trade involving Zibanejad. So the point is on the Quinn front, and that's just naming a few, like, it is weird where you go from the main bench boss to now the assistant coach. And I think that David Quinn will be in charge of the power play, which was very successful at Pittsburgh last year. Quinn was kind of a reason for the Ranger power play kind of turning around in the first place. Now, obviously, personnel is a huge part of it, right? You acquire Panarin, Fox, so on and so forth. But like Quinn, does have a good reputation with the power play. I think Joe Sacco, who he is another assistant coach as well. I'm kind of, I'm taking a pause on the career of Kreider here to talk more coaching staff right now. We knew about Phil Housley being let go with Peter Laviolette as well. Michael Pekka moves on to the Blackhawks as assistant coach. So a bit of a lateral move for Pekka, who I think was well thought of. And even more so, Dan Hughes is now the head coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins. So it's interesting. You have a little bit of an indirect swap. Because it's not like Hughes was the Rangers head coach, but Hughes goes to a divisional team in Pittsburgh and is their head coach. And it doesn't make you feel great as a Ranger fan where you see the likes of Chris Knobloch, becoming successful. Mike Sullivan, of course, became successful after he was a Ranger assistant coach. It's not unprecedented that the Rangers have had assistant coaches that have gone on to do really great things as head coaches. So Dan Hughes could be another one. But for the Rangers, it is David Quinn back, Joe Sacco, who was most recently the interim head coach of the Boston Bruins, taking over for Jim Montgomery. Sacco was with the Bruins as an assistant coach for, I think, about the last 10 years. Before that, he was the head coach of the Colorado Avalanche, where actually David Quinn was on his staff by the end of it. So Sacco, a lot of experience. He was a forward in the NHL for quite some time, and there's a connection to Sullivan, Sacco, and David Quinn. They were all at Boston University at around the same time. I believe late 80s, early 90s was around the time that they were there. And then Ty Hennes is the other assistant coach. Ty Hennes, I think, kind of takes on the Dan Muse role. Ty Hennes was a skills coach under Sullivan with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So with him, um, you know, think that's a good hire. That's probably the one that I'm probably most bullish on, honestly. Compare, Quinn. There's question marks there for sure. Bring him back. It's a bit of an odd move, but you just have to trust Sullivan in this case. And clearly, Drury feels highly enough about David Quinn, with them having worked together in the past. I would expect Sacco to be the penalty kill guy, Quinn the power play guy, and I would think that Sacco would work with the forwards and Quinn with the defensemen, but remains to be seen. Not going to get into that, but that is an update and a pretty big one. Considering it's just the assistant coaches, that David Quinn is back with the New York Rangers. But going back to Kreider, um, his career really takes a turn in the positive once Gerard Gallant takes over. That is where I believe he started to kill penalties. It might have been briefly with Quinn in Quinn's last year, but I should remember this for sure. But let's call it more with Gallant. 2022 season, he puts up 52 goals. Now, mind you, the year before, like in a shortened season of 50 games, he did put up 20. So that probably, but it's hard to say with certainty. That could have ended up being Kreider's first 30-goal season, if you look at it. And even, he was always close to 30, but never quite got there. And not only does he get past 30, not only does he get past 40, he reaches 52. He ties Adam Graves, fell short of Jaromir Jagr's Ranger single season goal record, but 52 goals for Kreider in an unbelievable season, a transformation for someone who had been in the league for a long time, and follows it up with, a big time playoffs, one in which he started out slow. I remember him and Zibanejad had started out very slow in the Pittsburgh series, but all of a sudden turned it up big time by the end of it. And, Kreider ends up scoring 10 goals in 20 games in that playoffs. You know, which was a big thing. Again, he was pretty well removed from the playoffs. Yes, there was that 2020 bubble season that was, 3 qualifying game playoffs against the Carolina Hurricanes where they went 0-3. But here, he scored huge goals in game 6 against Pittsburgh, again, to keep the Rangers season alive. He had a sort of a fluky goal against Louis Domingue late. And then I remember next game 7, he sets the tone against the Penguins in the game the Rangers eventually won in overtime. But then, scores, big goals as well as against Carolina. The guy was just a force. He really became at that point, known as just one of the best net front guys in the league on the power play. Just incredible stuff as far as what he was doing. He scored 26 power play goals in the 2022 season. So unbelievable. So, really was a bit unlocked under Gerard Gallant. The next year scores 36 goals. It was definitely a drop off. He went from 77 points to 54, but still 36 goals the next year. Gallant gets fired, then it's Peter Laviolette. And the first year under Laviolette, just not the last, the most recent season, but the one before that, 39 goals, 75 points. That's the thing. He basically, it was a really good year. And he has his sort of crowning achievement moment in that memorable Carolina game. You know what? I want to mention this as well. 2023, among there was a lot of disappointing Rangers in the 2023 playoffs. Panarin comes to mind. This was the Devils series. I remember Lafreniere took a lot of heat, but 2023, Kreider actually put up 6 goals and 9 points in 7 games, which maybe the stats are a little misleading, but he did produce. And then the 2024 season again, um, does really well under Laviolette. At this point, to me, the Zibanejad Kreider duo is deteriorating a little bit. Like I feel like Mika's game was dropping off, but I felt like Kreider that year was really good. And then let's go to this past season. A real disaster for Kreider. Now, we can blame it on the back injury. We can blame it on, I think maybe it was a vertigo situation, a mangled hand that happened after he was in the Four Nations tournament, which was kind of controversial. He didn't necessarily probably deserve that nod, but look, for Kreider, who kind of missed the boat on Olympics with the NHL not having been in it since 2014, this was kind of maybe his one chance to be in a best on best tournament. But look, I'd be very, very surprised if he's in next season's Olympics. So this was maybe his one chance, and he did score a goal, not a huge one, and he did play the deciding game against Canada over Kyle Connor, who was a healthy scratch. Which again, there was a lot of consternation as far as that was concerned by fans. But the point is, for Kreider, um, the assist numbers were ridiculous. I mean, he's always kind of been known as a guy, although the year before he had 36 assists for not being a huge assist player, but only 8 assists, was really bad 5-on-5 and just looked totally out of it. I mean, he was a healthy scratch against the Devils in December. He played on the fourth line at times. Like it was a marked difference. And that was tough to watch. Like that was bad by Chris Kreider. Call it what you will. He looked checked out, and maybe it was the memo that upset him, but he needed to be better than that. He wasn't a great leader. It was, should it tarnish his legacy? No, it shouldn't tarnish his legacy, but it's part of the story. It's part of, what I will remember that it didn't end well with Chris Kreider. And as years go on, you're going to remember the good times and there was plenty of it. I mean, 183 games as a Ranger, 326 goals. Like this was a success story. But there's no doubt that this core needed to be changed, and Chris Kreider is at the heart of that. And so now he is on his way to Anaheim, a team that was on his no trade list. He had a 15-team no trade, but it sounds like Chris Drury and Kreider's camp are working together. And it sounds like he was very much okay with going to Anaheim. He waived the no trade clause, and rejoins former Rangers. It's kind of the 2022 brigade with Trouba, Ryan Strome, Frank Vetrano, and now Chris Kreider. So, a lot of 2022 Rangers on that Duck squad, a team that's looking like they're on the rise. And the Ducks have a lot of cap space. I wouldn't be shocked if Kreider has a bounce back next season, not to the points of what we saw, I think, in recent years, but certainly better than this past one. That was really ugly. And so I think Kreider could be rejuvenated and maybe more healthy. But at the same time, the Rangers had to do this. This is, for me, it wasn't a question. And you look at the team as well. The Rangers have a lot of left wings currently. I mean, right now, Panarin, Lafreniere, Cooley, like this is a position of strength. Whereas, like if the Rangers do trade K'Andre Miller, that is a position of weakness. The left side of that defense, like you're going to need to make moves in conjunction with dealing Miller. In the case of Kreider, this is more of an internal thing where someone like Will Cooley, he takes on a bigger role. As far as the number one power play unit, and again, so much can change between now and then. I'd like to see Will Cooley kind of get a look in that net front role, but what I do think is going to happen is it'll probably be JT Miller that kind of takes that spot with the rest of the original crew. But again, I'm talking way too premature because the offseason, I mean, literally the Stanley Cup final is still going on as this trade happened. This was the first big trade that happened in the NHL offseason. And so that Chris Drury means business and is trying to make moves. I want to talk quickly about Carey Terrance. Carey Terrance, is a center who, look, I think the Rangers must think somewhat highly of him because that's kind of the big deal here. Like the Rangers moving up to 15 spots, that's not nothing. But again, it's really just a pick swap. That's all it is the Rangers basically giving back the pick they got for Jacob Trouba to Anaheim, and then the Rangers basically acquiring a later third round pick. I believe it's pick 89. And the Rangers are trading pick 104. So with Terrance, he was on the World Junior squad for USA this past season, scored a couple of goals. Um, it seems to me as if he would project more as a bottom six center who has speed, which the Rangers desperately need. They need speed. So I like the attributes he provides, but it remains to be seen what he will be, right? Like this, Carey Terrance may really end up not being anything, but I also think there's reason to think that, look, he could maybe in due time crack an NHL roster. So this is someone, and the Rangers were kind of thin as far as center prospects. The Rangers don't have many of them. So as far as the positional need in it, like this makes sense. And Terrance, recently drafted 2023, not long ago, um, from I believe upstate New York, and we'll see what he brings to the fold. And that will be sort of, I mean, unless somehow that draft pick pans out, the third rounder that they got, this is going to be kind of the one link, to the Kreider deal that you hope somehow works. But it's more about offloading the salary. That's the big thing here. It's not so much about the prospect. It's not about the picks. It's about the contract. And it's sad because Kreider's value dropped a lot. If this had happened a year ago, we're talking at a much different return. But you can only work in the moment now. And, Drury basically did the best he could. And look, ultimately, it is a sad day because it is an end of an era with Chris Kreider now becoming an Anaheim Duck. But certainly a lot moving forward for the Rangers. Like I said, don't be surprised if more dominoes fall. I think Keandre Miller being the most likely one to go next. But there are a lot of players that may not be here next year. We've already seen moves, right? Like this has been ongoing and continuing, and it needs to happen because this is a rotten core. The Rangers need to change their identity in a major way, and they're starting to do that. And you need a different leadership mix because it wasn't working. And this is going to be a very big offseason coming up. And the first move is the longest standing Ranger, now gone, Chris Kreider, headed to Anaheim, dealt to the Ducks in what is, one of the most notable and most accomplished Rangers. He is now gone, and there will be many more to come. So Chris Kreider is an Anaheim Duck.